I want to talk about this next, and it's about gender-based violence, and in particular violence against women. One of the most pronounced expressions of the unequal power relations between women and men. Experts and researchers say there is no single factor that can explain gender-based violence in our societies, but rather it's a myriad factors that contribute to it, and the interplay of these factors is what lies at the root of the problem. I want to look at South Africa. Almost 11 women murdered every day in our country, according to the police. Data based on media reports show more than a third of those who are killed by current or former intimate partner. Shooting seems to be the primary cause of death of women killed in South Africa, and half of the women knew their killer. Many killed by a current partner, 27%, or a former intimate partner, 5%. Let's open up the subject now with anti-GBV and femicide activist Dr. Lesley Anne Forster to home in on the psychology behind the extensive violence and prevalence of GBV and femicide in South Africa. Dr. Forster, good morning to you, and thank you very much for being with us. Appreciate your time. How do you approach the question of what the psychology is driving this behavior? One imagines it's a complex question in itself. Break it down for us, please.
Yes, good morning, and thank you for having me. I think that we do have an idea of what is going on in our country, and a lot of it is rooted in colonialism and apartheid, which were very violent systems. And that violence has continued into what we, the society we have today. But the reason why we have particularly violence against women and girl children is because of the low status of women and girl children in our society. And that we haven't been able to turn around yet. We don't have the mechanisms in place that can change that. So the low status in society means that the rights of women and girl children are ignored, and the rights of men and boys take precedent above that. So because the low status is there, the value of women's lives is reduced, and women's lives are really commodified. By that we mean that their partners see them as objects that belong to them, and that these objects can be used and abused as they wish to do. Now, we have got a national strategic plan on gender-based violence, which actually gives us a comprehensive response to addressing gender-based violence. And if implemented, it will be really, really powerful. But we have political will from the president's office, but I believe, and our experience has shown, that that political will doesn't filter down, to all the levels of government and through all of the departments and service providers that work on this issue. So there needs to be a countrywide program that changes the psyche of people to learn to value women and girl children's lives in the same way that, men are valued. Now, we also have to...
I want to stop you there, Lesley. Hold on. Lesley Anne, yes. Sorry. Let's talk about some of the things you raised right at the beginning. And this is where yes. I think it's important to kind of just rest for a moment. When you said that the rights of women are ignored and the rights of men are not, or even amplified in our society, what is yes. the reason for that? Why is that happening? Who is doing that? Who is ignoring women?
Right. We have a very strong patriarchal society, which means that the rights of men, well, not just the rights, but if we talk about males are valued within our society. And it comes through in our political systems. It comes through in our religious systems. If we look at who the leaders are in our cultural, religious, political systems, males are at the top, of that game. And it hasn't changed at all. I mean, there've been some small measures of change, but we're still fighting with this last election about only 2 women premiers, in the entire country, and we've got 9 provinces, that sort of thing. And if you look at the proportion of women, particularly in decision making, we remain at a very, very small percentage of it, if you look at women in business. So there are prominent women, and there are some changes that are coming through as women head institutions, but to a large extent, women are not being taken as seriously and not given the opportunities. The other thing about patriarchy is with women, they are always questioned about their capability, capacity, skill, education, that isn't applied to males when they come into position, into decision-making arenas. So we need to look at gender equality from a holistic perspective. And we have not got a gender equal society. We are far from that. And in actual fact, South Africa, with femicide, has got rates 5 times more than most other countries in the world. And that's because we are so gender unequal. And then all the issues around, if you look at poverty, if you look at economic dependence, women bear the brunt of it. So this is where and we talk about, everybody talks about, we are going to address gender equality, and we're going to, work on creating a more equal society, but in reality, they don't. So our prevention programs all work with how, to address this, and they do it through awareness programs, through, ceremonies that sort of talk about, the male responsibility, but we don't shift fundamentally and at a structural level the inequality that is there. So I think there's a lot of work that's needed. We know there's a lot of work that's needed, and we're not going to see a change until we're actually willing to address gender inequality. Now, we always talk about the political economy of gender-based violence. The political economy refers to the fact that women are used for the lowly or reproductive work in their homes and families. That's the cooking, the cleaning, the taking care of the elderly, and it's unremunerated. And that continues to keep women at a very low status. So until we shift the way women are viewed, the way the social norms are structured, we are going to continue to see this gender-based violence rising. And no efforts are really working effectively, because you can have political will through the president, but if the ministers are not, as committed to addressing that issue, then it breaks down. And if you have your DGs in your departments not understanding what actually needs to happen, it'll break down. So most of the funding that we have, and it's not a lot, gets put into programs that are not addressing the root causes, the fundamental issues of inequality in our society. If that shifts, if we understand the significance of it, if we understand how much of a better society we'll have if women are working on an equal basis, because their contribution, which is now, very small, if we put that together with what, males bring to the table, it will be amazing. And I want to say this, there's some work in the country around shifting toxic masculinities, or rather unhealthy masculinities, but it is minuscule. It is no, none of the programs actually work to shift that. A lot of it is about preserving the power that men have in society, but in different ways. And I think those are the really deep issues. We don't go deep enough and wide enough, to actually address this problem properly. So I think that's where there are some good initiatives, but it's not enough at this point in time.
Let's talk a little bit more. We've got very little time left. Dr. Forster, what are some of the factors based on that concept and expression of gender psychology? We know that when women vocalize their abuse in the home or even in the workplace, they're seen as weak. Sometimes it's seen as bringing shame onto a family. People will say, oh, she's brought that upon herself. She perhaps even asked for it. She pushed him too far. Talk to us about those dynamics. Those go to the heart of the home. Sometimes, even if a woman is not financially dependent on her husband, you talked about patriarchy early on, those frameworks of power are already set in the home. Even if she's financially independent, sometimes the chief breadwinner, her voice and her power is silenced inside the home.
Yeah. Again, it all points back to patriarchy. In patriarchy, the position and status of men are preserved, and they are celebrated, whereas with women it isn't. And then whatever the man does, the woman carries the shame and the blame for that. And as a society as a whole, women and men work together to preserve that patriarchy in societies, in most of our societies and communities, where they don't realize the harm that it actually causes. So this is why I believe that it is the state's prerogative and the state's responsibility to run countrywide programs that address unhealthy norms within our society and societal beliefs. But because we are a patriarchal society, you will find that both men and women, we're raised in that patriarchal society. We are trained that this is how we treat men and women, that it just permeates all layers of families and will continue in this way. And then, because of patriarchy, you'll find that a lot of women, and this is something we don't talk about often, they are killed by their partners, but it's never deemed a femicide. And in my own family, I've had, somebody whose head was bashed against the wall, and she died. And then the diagnosis was that she had died of a brain hemorrhage. A lot of femicide is covered up, and no one wants to address that. It's a very difficult area to actually break into, because patriarchy preserves the status and the position of men in society. We have to deal with the gender inequality in our society before we see any kind of change to gender-based violence.
Dr. Lesley Anne Forster, thank you very much for talking to us. Appreciate your analysis and your expertise.